The long-run aggregate supply curve is representative of a country's ability to produce GDP or output in the long run. It's related to a country's production's possibility frontier. It showcases the amount of production or output that is sustainable for an economy to produce in the long run. In this video, we're going to look at how the long-run aggregate supply curve fits into the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. A higher level of prices or price level doesn't loosen the constraints that are imposed by an economy's resource base, its level of technology, or its efficiency of its institutional arrangements. Therefore, an increase in the price level creates no sustainable expansion in output. Right? So if we increase the price level, this does not allow for our aggregate supply to increase or decrease. It doesn't change it. So as a result, our long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical. The long-run aggregate supply curve can really be linked to the Solow growth model. As we can see here, the Solow growth model showcases an output at its steady-state equilibrium of 15. This is the outcome from the mix of investment and depreciation and its ability to produce. And so we have an output level of 15 on the Solow growth model. That's on the vertical axis of the Solow growth model. Note that this could be tied to the horizontal axis of the aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. So if we have an output level of 15 on the Solow growth model, this can be our level of output that we would be at on our aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. So if our long-run ability to produce is at a level of 15, as we see here from the Solow model, then our long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical at this level of output. Now, from the Solow model, we can understand our level of output and our level of aggregate supply, our long-run aggregate supply. But from that, we should be asking another question. We also have to understand what we mean by long-run when it comes to our long-run aggregate supply. In economics, we have a very specific meaning when we say long run. The long run is a period of time of sufficient duration that people have the opportunity to modify their behavior in response to price changes. What does this mean? This means that the cost components of supplying goods have had sufficient time to adjust to changing market conditions. The long run does not mean some time period like 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, or a year, or 10 years. It's not a specific time. The long run means that we have had the ability to adjust to some kind of changes that have occurred. The cost components within supplying have had sufficient time to adjust to the changing conditions. So for example, say you have a lease on a building where you're manufacturing something, and the lease comes up 9 months from now. Well, all of a sudden today, some factor hits, some exogenous shock to our system hits the economy and the cost components change. It's more expensive to hire labor or things like that, right? Now all of a sudden we want to produce less of our goods. We are not to the long run yet because we need to be able to adjust to this changing condition where now it's more expensive to hire labor. Maybe we need a different building now that it's more expensive to hire labor. Maybe we need a building where we're going to be able to put more machines in that building or something like that. Well, we can't do that right now because right now we still have a 9-month lease on our building. Once we can adjust all of our elements of our cost components, only then do we reach the long run. So in this scenario, we reach the long run after 9 months and our lease is actually up. So the long run is not some set time period. The long run, it has a specific meaning in economics. It means that our cost components of, say, supplying goods has had sufficient time to adjust to the changing market conditions, or as is defined here, a period of time of sufficient duration that people have the opportunity to modify their behavior in response to price changes. So the long-run aggregate supply curve showcases the relationship between the price level and an economy's ability to produce goods and services once they have had sufficient time to adjust their prior commitments whenever possible. So this point, this level of output that our long-run aggregate supply is at, serves as a really important benchmark for comparison within the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. This point here, where our long run aggregate supply curve hits the horizontal axis, the level of output that we have here, this point is our full employment rate of output. This is also our level of potential output. It corresponds to our natural rate of unemployment. This is our benchmark. I'll often refer to this as the full employment level of output, but at times we'll use the nomenclature of potential output as well. But this point is really important for comparison within the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. An economy's full employment rate of output or potential output is the maximum output rate that is sustainable, that we can manage and continue producing at this level. It's the level that we can continue on with. It's neither a temporary high or lower than what we're capable of. This maximum output rate is the sustainable rate that is determined by the supply of resources, our level of investment and depreciation, the level of technology, and the structure of institutions, along with other factors in our economy. These long-run factors showcase our production possibilities and are insensitive to changes in the price level. It doesn't vary with increases in the price level or decreases in the price level. Because once the price level has increased, if we've hit the long run, we've had the ability to adjust or change to this new price level. And so we get back to our long run ability to produce, our sustainable level to produce. And so hence we have this vertical long run aggregate supply curve. Output doesn't change as the price level changes. The short run may bring fluctuations in output and employment, but in the long run, the economy moves towards our full employment benchmark. If our equilibrium is at the long run aggregate supply, our economy is neither running too hot nor crashing below its potential. The long run aggregate supply curve serves as a very important benchmark within the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. All right, guys, so we have seen the long run aggregate supply curve, what it means, and how it's related to the Solow growth model. To continue on in this lecture series, click on the video right over here, and we're going to continue on with the short run aggregate supply curve.